When you think of Hot Topic K-drama kiss scenes from 2022, what comes to mind? Is it this? This kiss scene from A Business Proposal went very viral. It's only a few seconds. They're not even the main leads, but everyone was really obsessed with it. It's the removal of the glasses that really tips it over. Late to the party, my sister and I recently decided to watch the popular K-drama after putting it off for months. We finished it actually literally yesterday, and I guess you could say it was fine. She says it's the worst K-drama she's ever seen, but, I guess it's enjoyable overall. Before we decided to watch it, she had seen clips of the secondary leads thinking they were the mains, which is unfortunate, but we were both interested in the lead up to this, super popular glasses removal kiss. But when we got to it, it had been completely ruined, really, by the events immediately before it. Let's rewind. If you don't know the plot of A Business Proposal, basically, Hadi works at this food company and Taemu is the president. Taemu's grandfather wants him to get married, have kids, everything like that. So Taemu is sent on blind dates. One of these blind dates is with Hari's best friend, Youngsa. And instead of Youngsa going, she decides to send Hari so that she can, turn the guy off of her. They've done this before, whatever. The deception is discovered by Taemu and his secretary slash best friend, only friend, basically brother, Sunghoon. Taemu is understandably ticked off, but he does like her. In fact, he fell in love at first sight. He wanted to marry her from the jump, and he does need someone to get his grandfather off his back, so he manipulates her into pretending to be his girlfriend. The main plot itself actually has a lot of issues, but I guess it's for another time. While all that is going on, Youngsa has decided to get an apartment of her own, and she ends up moving in right next door to Sunghoon. Now, earlier in the show, Youngsa also fell in love at first sight with Sunghoon, and we learned later that he felt the same way, but due to the complications of the main plot, he tells her that it's best if they don't get to know each other. He draws a line, as the show puts it regularly. They keep running into each other, though, not just because, obviously, they live next to each other, and her best friend is in a fake relationship with his best friend, but they really just can't avoid each other for some reason. Fate said that they need to interact, apparently. And she's still really interested in Sunghoon, and who wouldn't be? The man is put together, and he's been very kind and gentlemanly every time we've seen him. There was a man who he had tricked her into putting a camera in her home, and when she found out, she was trying to take it to the police, but she runs into the guy, and he tries to take her and run. Sunghoon, who stumbles upon the whole situation, chases after the dude for a while, man. Through buildings, down the streets, and jump kicks him or whatever, so that they can take him to the police. And that's really cool. He also gave her a ride when he saw her at the bus stop, and during that same event, she really had to use the restroom, and the one she was trying to run into was locked, and he busted the door open so she could use it. After the restroom fiasco, she's too embarrassed to face him, so she's doing the most to avoid him, and he's kind of what? Even though he was the one who initiated the line in the first place. And really at this point, proper communication would be so helpful, but the characters in this show, let me tell you, they do not communicate well. They just don't have conversations that they need to have. It's honestly very frustrating. I guess it makes for more stressful romantic angst, and I do love some romance angst, but this was just a bit much. So anyway, they end up at the same restaurant. This is the second time they've ended up at this restaurant at the same time. They end up sitting next to each other for the second time. And, sitting next to him, she's super embarrassed. She drinks herself silly. And he's like, you don't got to be like this. Why you all like this? And she's like, oh my God, I don't even know at this point. To be honest, anyway. So she leaves. He has stepped away and she leaves. And he goes after her. She's stumbling and bumbling because she's drunk. Remember, she's drunk. And he's holds on to her so she doesn't fall. Blah, 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 blah. She's, drunk and explains, how could I face a guy that I like after embarrassing myself like that, basically. And she's like, let me go, basically. And he's like, oh, if I let you go, you'll fall. And she's like, why do you care? Let me go, or I'm going to cross the line, da, 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 da. And she counts down. He's staring at her and she kisses him. And then it's really quick. But then he pulls her back in and kisses her again. So yikes. It's not the worst thing, but she is drunk, so maybe stop. So that's the end of their part of the story in that episode. The next episode is where the glasses removal kiss happens, okay? And so Youngsa wakes up in Sunghoon's apartment in different clothes. She's like, understandably. And she's like, what happened? What happened? And she can't remember. And then we get this mini flashback for remembering or whatever, and you see they're about to sleep together. but she can't remember anything. She doesn't remember the rest. She doesn't remember actually what happened. She can't remember. So she's shocked. We're shocked. Everyone should be shocked. But she's mostly embarrassed, and she tries to run out of his apartment, but she ends up running into him. He's like, "Oh, I got hangover soup, whatever." And she's like, "Oh, I gotta go." And he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "About last night." And she's like, yeah, forget it. It never happened. It's null and void." They're doing that whole not actually naming what they're talking about thing. So the audience at the moment, unless you read the webcomic, I guess. I didn't read the webcomic. I don't know if this exact situation happens in it. Maybe I should have looked that up. But if you're just watching the drama, we don't actually technically have confirmation at this point that they slept together. My sister and I were like, "Oh no, she thinks they did, but they didn't." It's going to be like, "Oh, she's going to embarrass herself thinking they did when they didn't." And that's really where it seemed like it was going, because they weren't being clear about what they were talking about. But then we get to the glasses removal kiss scene, and she, again, super embarrassed, avoiding him. And he's like, he's like upset, I guess. And they're like, "What you're doing to avoid me is actually the most. And it actually kind of hurts my feelings or whatever." And she's like, "No, it's because I'm embarrassed because I can't remember what happened." And so he's like, "You really don't remember?" And my sister and I are like, "Yep." He's going to be like, "Ah, silly, we didn't sleep together." But no. Instead, he's like, "I'm going to make sure you remember this time." So yeah, they did sleep together. 'Tis confirmed. They slept together while Young Seo was so drunk she couldn't even remember it. So here's the thing about consent. You have to be in your right mind to give it, right? So if you're under duress, it's not actually consent. If you don't fully understand what you're agreeing to, you're not actually giving consent. If you said yes at one point and then things start happening and you're like, no, you no longer have given consent, okay? Another way to not be able to give consent is if you're under the influence. When you're drunk, your inhibitions are suppressed. You do things you wouldn't do in your right mind. You do things and you might not even know that you're doing it. Alcohol impacts your frontal lobe, which plays roles not only in movement, but also in language and executive functions like decision making. At the moment, Young Seo's decision making abilities were impaired to the point where she couldn't even remember making the decision or going through the actions. It seems Sunghoon may have also been drinking, but he was clearly way more sober than she was. He was able to walk, talk, and run perfectly fine. He was able really to make the decision to sleep with her, and she wasn't. Yeah, Young Seo liked Sunghoon. Both of the characters and the audience knew that at the time, but it's really hard to argue that if she wasn't drunk, she would have kissed him right then, which is what led to the rest of it. Really, it should be terrifying what happened to Young Seo. She has no idea what happened. He could have done anything to her. There could have been other people involved. He could have filmed it and she would have no idea. I really need someone to explain how this is a cool way to start a love story. This is not a cool message that it's sending people. It's telling girls that if you like the guy, it's okay if he has sex with you if you're nearly unconscious. And it's telling guys that, hey, if she said she was into you, then you can sleep with her even if you can't be certain she's fully there, even if you can't be certain she's consenting. And that is terrifying. Very much not okay. What would have been a lot better is if he just brought her to his because he couldn't get into hers. Where's her key? It's probably in her purse. He's not going to go in her purse. You don't go in a woman's purse. So he puts her in the bed, sits on the couch or whatever, and explains in the morning. That would not only be more logically fitting with how caring and kind he is throughout the show, but it would also show Young Seo and the audience that Young Seo is safe with him, that he's not going to take advantage of her in her drunken state, that nothing that she doesn't allow would happen to her or her things. It would show that someone respects her. The way that it is as a viewer, I would be afraid of what he'd do when I'm unaware. If I was ever asleep or whatever, I would be terrified. I'm not able to be secure in knowing that nothing would happen to me. So yes, Young Seo's attracted to him. Yes, after the fact she isn't horrified, but how would he know that that's how she'd react? How would Sunghoon explain himself if she were to wake up yelling that he had taken advantage of her? What defense does Sunghoon have? Oh, you were fine with it at the time? She was drunk out of her mind? It's disturbing, and the show doesn't address it at all. It's completely glossed over. There's never a moment or question of concern, and I guess that's obvious because how would that look for the show? But why would you write it like this? So I was wondering if maybe this just isn't a crime in SoCo. So I looked it up. And according to Article 299 of the Criminal Code, it absolutely is. It's quasi. The legal definition for full-blown you know the word, focuses on intimidation and violence, like the use of intimidation and violence. And there's been pushes to update that, but those kind of have been pushed back, which I guess sort of makes sense if you already have it addressed in quasi, but I'm not a Korean lawyer. I can't tell you completely exactly what's going on with that. But it is still indeed quasi, meaning Sunghoon has committed a crime. If Young-seo wanted to press charges just off my cursory glance through South Korean law, I think she could, and that's just not a cool recipe for a love story. It's not good romance. It's not. Now, this dubious consent idea isn't new, nor is it unique to K-drama, but I'm really shocked at how little conversation I feel like there was about it. Now, obviously, I wasn't there in 2022, but looking through it now, like I'm seeing some Reddit threads, I saw a video on YouTube, like there's some conversation, but considering how these were our hot and poppin' side characters, you'd think there would be more conversation, especially since it is definitely a crime. Like it's not like interpretation of law or, oh, maybe it is. Obviously, sexual harassment things and sexual assault things, sometimes it's just if they're not into it. It's only a crime if they're not into it. And technically she was, but when it comes to consent, we can't confirm that she was into it at the time. In fact, she doesn't even know if she was into it at the time. She could have resisted and not realized because she can't remember. Everyone's all into the glasses removal kiss, but everything leading up to it, it's really tainted, in my opinion. It's all very uncomfortable. And then the poor communication that continues really doesn't help. Like, it ends with them, it's cute, they're cute overall. It's just, you could have easily not had this happen. And it would have just made the story so much better. But what do you all think? If you watched the show, did this part bother you? Did you even notice? How would you react if this happened to you or your friend or sibling? Because if it was me, I would be terrified for me or my friend. I would have called the police. That is all from me for now. Thanks for watching.